What would a tall lineup look like for Syracuse basketball next season? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's episode, we're talking about the possibility of Syracuse basketball using a taller lineup at times next season. We'll go over the strengths of the lineup, the weaknesses of a lineup, and when the Cuse can use this possible lineup combination next season. So tons to look forward to on today's podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, so we're talking about a taller lineup at times for Syracuse basketball to use next season in spurts. Before we can get to the strengths and the weaknesses and when Syracuse could possibly use this lineup, we got to go over what the lineup actually is. So I thought of a few combinations, and this was the one that really stood out to me as probably being the primary taller lineup for Syracuse next season if they so choose to use it. The point guard would be J.J. Starling. J.J. Starling played point guard at times in high school, hasn't really played it at the Division I level yet, but in spurts, it could work. Chris Bell would be the two guard, so a very, very tall two guard in Chris Bell. You would have Jyare Davis as the starting three, so he would actually stay in position. Donnie Freeman at the four would still be in the lineup, obviously, in the taller lineup. He would be the four. And Eddie Lampkin would stay as the five. So this would be a taller lineup for Syracuse if they so choose to use it. The strengths of this lineup, if they were to use it at times, is that they have a lot of size. Obviously, it's a taller lineup, right? You have J.J. Starling as the smallest player in that group at 6'4". And what this does is would make the team probably pretty awesome at rebounding. They would be probably pretty good at it. And hey, Syracuse, as I've said on this podcast, for the last 5 years minimum, I haven't checked further than that, has had a negative rebounding margin. And what that means is that on average, their opponent out-rebounds them every single game over the past 5 years. How many times this past season did rebounding cost Syracuse? Why were they able to upset some teams like a North Carolina? They kept the rebounding relatively close. So if you have a taller lineup like this where your smallest player is J.J. Starling, you're going to get a lot of rebounds. Eddie Lampkin averaged 7 rebounds a game last year at Colorado. Donnie Freeman was one of the best high school rebounders in the country. Jyare Davis averaged 8 rebounds, maybe even 9 rebounds at Delaware. Chris Bell's not a great rebounder, but if he's at the 2, he might become a better rebounder. And then J.J. Starling averaged 3 boards a game last season, but that was at a starting 2 guard. Now you put him at the 1, he might rebound a little bit more. So you have a lot of size, obviously, which leads to probably more rebounds, which would help Syracuse in that regard. You would also have lots of scoring options with this type of combination. You have 4 players on the floor that last season in college, Division I, averaged at least 10 points per game. 4 of them. J.J. Starling averaged 13. Chris Bell, off the top of my head, I believe it was 12 to 13 points, one of the best shooters in the country. Jyare Davis was 17, 18 points a game at Delaware last year. And Eddie Lampkin was 10 points a game at Colorado. So you got a lot of scorers. The only one that I didn't mention is Donnie Freeman, who just so happens to be the number 6 overall recruit in the country. The number 6 overall recruit in the country is the only player that did not average at least 10 points per game, but that's because he was in high school, so he couldn't have averaged 10 points a game, but he was an elite scorer in high school. Obviously, you can't just be an average scorer to be the number 6 player in the country overall. So you got a lot of scoring. And with that scoring, you got a ton of players there who can create their own shot, at least two. We know that J.J. Starling can create his own shot. He is very effective in the mid-range, and I think he's going to take a step up attacking the rim this season. And you also have Jyare Davis, who's very good in the mid-range and very good around the rim and can create his own shot as well. You got at least two players of those scorers that can create their own shot. And that's not to say that Donnie Freeman wouldn't be able to do it. We just haven't seen it yet at the college level. And Eddie Lampkin, while he's not someone that's going to always put the ball on the floor, and he can, if you watch his tape, he can put the ball on the floor. He's just not going to be a freight train and go bully his way to the basket. But he does have some pretty solid post moves. So if you want to count that as creating your own shot, you can. So overall, the size that this lineup would bring, it would help the rebounding. You have at least four players that averaged 10 points. You have four players that averaged 10 points a game last year, and the only one that wasn't was Donnie Freeman because he was in high school. Overall, this is a lineup that has a lot of positives, and there's still another positive I want to get to, but we'll save it for later. And then there are some weaknesses with the lineup as well. But once again, to reiterate, the taller lineup that Syracuse could possibly use at times next season is J.J. Starling as the point guard in this lineup, Chris Bell as the starting shooting guard, and then everyone else in the lineup would stay at their proper positions. So Jyare Davis at the 3, Donnie Freeman at the 4, and Eddie Lampkin at the 5. Almost feels like the exact opposite of last year, where you had at least two players in the lineup after Naheem McLeod went down. You had two players in the lineup that were playing out of position and they were undersized, that being Justin Taylor at the 4 and Malik Brown at the 5. So this is a good thing. You got players, you got more flexibility with the team overall, which leads me back to saying why I think Syracuse basketball's roster is better. That is some of the strengths of the taller lineup. Now coming up, there's one more strength that I want to highlight, and then some of the weaknesses of this lineup. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And hey, Syracuse football fans, lots of optimism out there, myself included. If you believe that Syracuse football next year is going to win at least 10 games, why not bet them to win the ACC outright? You might as well, because you already think they're going to win at least 10 games. You got to figure a team that wins its conference has to win at least 10, right? So you might as well bet Syracuse to win the ACC, especially when their odds on FanDuel right now are plus 4,500. So why not take a stab at Syracuse football winning the ACC in Fran Brown's first year as head coach? Why not? Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we're going over the possibility of Syracuse basketball using a taller lineup in spurts next season. And coming up later in the podcast, I'll talk about when Syracuse should use it and for how long they should use it for. The lineup, of course, being J.J. Starling as the point guard, Chris Bell as the shooting guard, Jyare Davis as the small forward, Donnie Freeman as the power forward, and Eddie Lampkin at center. Some of the strengths that I talked about were this lineup obviously being taller, has a lot of size, which should help the rebounding. They got a lot of players that can score. 4 players on the team averaged at least 10 points per game last year at their respective schools. And Donnie Freeman is the number 6 overall player in the country heading into next season. Now, There's one more strength that I want to highlight here of this lineup, which is that they're very athletic. Athleticism matters. You got J.J. Starling, Jyare Davis, and Donnie Freeman. I would consider all elite level athletes. All of them are elite. They can run up and down the floor, so it's excellent to use in transition. Not to say that Chris Bell and Eddie Lampkin aren't athletic. It's just that Starling, Davis, and Donnie feel like guys who can really play above the rim. You got three players who can play above the rim. Eddie Lampkin's solid in the post, right? And Chris Bell's a great shooter. But the athleticism with three players like Starling, Davis, and Donnie is definitely a strength of this possible lineup. So that's one more strength I wanted to highlight for you guys. But there are some weaknesses. There are some weaknesses with it, which is why Syracuse can't roll this lineup for 40 minutes or 35 minutes or 30 minutes next season. It needs to be used in spurts because it's not perfect. There's a lack of shooting with this lineup. You got Chris Bell. Chris Bell is the only proven three-point sniper in this group of five players. That's it. Having a lot of shooters allows the team to space the floor. And if you only have one or you don't have any, teams can kind of back off, right? They can back off. It makes going to the rim a lot tougher. All of a sudden, Eddie Lampkin in the post feeding out, it's not as effective because you don't have that many shooters. So Chris Bell is the only one in this lineup that can really shoot it. You hope that J.J. Starling shoots better than 32% from three next season. And if he does, that would be great. But we can't guarantee that. Donnie Freeman, it's said that he can score at all three levels on the floor. So that means in the paint, in the mid-range, and in three-point. He does have a nice shot. We saw it in the McDonald's All-American game when he went 2 for 4 from downtown. But we haven't seen it yet, so it's not proven. That's about it. Jyare Davis is not a great three-point shooter. Eddie Lampkin I don't think he's ever shot a three in his career in college. So not a lot of proven shooting out there, and that's certainly a weakness if Syracuse were to use this lineup. The next weakness of it is obviously that there is no true floor general. Talked about a ton of times on this podcast, why Jaquan Carlos is so valuable, because he is that pass-first point guard. He's pass-first, one of the best all-around passers in the transfer portal that Syracuse got. But in this lineup, obviously, Jaquan Carlos is on the bench. J.J. Starling is running the point. He's done it before at high school, but since he's been at college, whether it's at Notre Dame or in Syracuse, he's been a two guard. And there's probably a reason for that, because he's probably better as a two guard. He can pass a little, but he's not a floor general. Eddie Lampkin, as I've mentioned, is a fantastic passer. He can facilitate, but is he really going to be the primary runner of your offense? Do you really want to run a lineup where Eddie Lampkin is standing at the three-point line running the show? He can do it at times, but I would say probably not. You would rather him back down in the post and kick it out to everyone. But you need someone to get it to him. So you are lacking that true floor general with this lineup. Once again, there are some weaknesses that we've went over so far with the lineup of J.J. Starling, Chris Bell, Jyare Davis, Donnie Freeman, and Eddie Lampkin. Shooting is definitely some sort of problem. There's no floor general. And finally, defense. Defense. Where are the proven elite defenders in this lineup? Donnie might be. Donnie might be an elite defender next year, or at least above average. He might. But we don't know for sure. I certainly expect more on the offensive end because it's kind of tougher to project defense with anyone, especially as freshmen. So maybe he can defend. Jyare Davis is solid as a defender, but he's not as good as Malik Brown was. and he's basically the replacement to Malik Brown. You got J.J. Starling, who's iffy. Iffy at best. Is that fair? Iffy defender, right? And of course, you got Bell and Lampkin, neither of which are good defenders. I've documented, I've said it, Chris Bell and his defense, it needs to improve for next season. Eddie Lampkin, 5 blocks all year as a 6'11 center, is just not good enough. So where are the elite defenders? There are no stoppers in this lineup for sure. There's no real stopper to it. You got a lot of scoring, as I mentioned off the top. You got a ton of players who can score. They can all score. And they got great size. Perhaps the size helps them on the defensive end. Can't hurt. But you don't really have that true stopper. You just don't have that all-conference defender in the lineup. So once again, to reiterate, the lineup that we are talking about is a taller Syracuse basketball lineup with J.J. Starling as the point guard, Chris Bell as the shooting guard, and then you have Jyare Davis at the 3, Donnie Freeman at the 4, and Eddie Lampkin at the 5, a possible lineup combination. Some of the strengths, teams, obviously this lineup has a lot of size. All 5 players can score. Very athletic lineup too. But the weaknesses, right? There's a lack of shooting aside from Chris Bell. There's no true floor general to be able to get the ball to any of these guys. And there's only one ball on the floor. You only got one ball. So you got to share it. And there's no true floor general for Syracuse in this lineup. And there's no proven defensive stoppers. They don't have any shutdown defender in this lineup either. That's proven, right? We hope that Donnie can be a great defender next year. Maybe J.J. Starling has a better year on defense. But overall, it's just not that great on the defensive side of the ball, at least looking at it on paper. Now, coming up, how often should Syracuse basketball use this lineup given the strengths of it and given the weaknesses of it? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's episode, we're going over a possible lineup combination, not a starting lineup combination for Syracuse basketball next season. And it is a taller lineup with J.J. Starling as the point guard, Chris Bell as the shooting guard, Jyare Davis at the 3, Donnie Freeman at the 4, and Eddie Lampkin as the center, just as the center in this lineup. Talked about the strengths. They have a lot of size. They got a lot of scorers. They're athletic, but the weaknesses are there's a lack of shooting on the floor. There's no true floor general, and defense is definitely a question mark with it as well. So now it's time to discuss how often the lineup should be used and how long it should be used. And I think it should be deployed. It should be deployed at least a few minutes a night. So 3 to 5 minutes, and it can swing in either direction depending on a few factors. I think it's definitely a change of pace, and it can catch teams off guard because you're playing a little bit taller. When to use it? Well, if Syracuse is facing a taller team, one of those elite teams in the country, you're playing a Duke, you're playing a North Carolina with those supreme athletes, this is a valuable lineup because rebounding could be the reason why you win or lose the game. Honestly, I was stunned when Syracuse knocked off North Carolina in the Dome this past season, in part because North Carolina just had the capability to absolutely dominate Syracuse on the boards. And they did when they met in Chapel Hill. But when they came to Syracuse, for whatever reason, Syracuse was able to hang on or just to hang with North Carolina on the glass. It also helped that they shot the lights out, but they kept the rebounding margin relatively close, and they were able to pull off a stunning upset. So when you're facing a team like a North Carolina, like a Duke, you know they have those supreme athletes. You know they have those tall guys in their lineup. Rebounding could become a problem. That's why in this scenario, you would have to use a taller lineup more than the 3 to 5 minutes that I mentioned. Also, because this team has, or this lineup has a lot of scorers, you got at least 3 players that can create their own shot off the dribble that we think, right? You got JJ Starling, you got Jyare Davis, and Donnie Freeman should be able to create his own shot. Eddie Lampkin's really solid in the post, so he can, I guess, create in that regard. And then Chris Bell is the lone player where he can't really create his own shot, but is excellent as a spot-up three-point shooter. If you're playing a team that has really bad on-ball defense, they're not good defending one-on-one, then this is a great lineup to use because you got athleticism and you got the ability to attack the rim. You can go up and down the floor in transition. If they're not good at defending one-on-one, use it. I think this would be very valuable against the lesser teams that Syracuse is going to play, the non-conference games that are not against the Texas and the Texas Tech. And I know Maryland's also now on the schedule, right? Not necessarily those teams, but you're playing against the mid-majors. This is a valuable lineup to use because you know that you have the better athletes. So using this lineup, attacking them one-on-one, it could work. The way I like to see it is, I know people are probably thinking like, you don't want a ball hog offense, right? You don't want a hero ball. The way I would say is you need to be like a chameleon. You need to be able to adapt to the team that you're playing. Who are you playing, right? And then try to attack them based on who you're playing. The way I would compare it is, remember the Patriot teams with, I know there's a lot of Bills fans that watch and listen to my channel, and as a Jets fan, I sympathize with you. But Tom Brady and the Bill Belichick Patriots, they were never the same team week in and week out. Every week, they were different. They would change their strategy based on their opponent. What does their opponent not do well? And how can we attack it based on what they have? So using that comparison or that logic, you don't want a hero ball offense as your primary offense. But when you're going against mid-majors and you have this type of lineup and you have these athletes, you need to be able to adapt to who you're playing. You need to be able to change who you are game in and game out. Now, situations where this lineup is not very good is pretty simple. If the team is trailing and you need three-point shooting late in the game, this is not the lineup to use. You need to get people on the floor that can shoot the three ball. So in that scenario, Jyare Davis needs to come out. You probably need to bring in Jaquan Carlos because he's a 34% three-point shooter. You don't have Eddie Lampkin probably needs to come out. In this scenario, if you're trailing and you need three-point shooting, you probably would need to go with more of a small ball lineup because they don't have any size that can really shoot. Donnie Freeman might be able to accomplish that because he can score at all 3 levels, so what we're told. But no one that's really proven that has a lot of size. So you're not going to want to go with a tall lineup if you're trailing and you need three-point shooting. It's as simple as that. Now, if Syracuse were to land someone like Noah Waterman, who I talked about on yesterday's podcast, that would work. That would certainly be helpful because he's someone who's 37% at 3 at BYU last season, which is a Power 5 school, and he's 6'11". So that would certainly accomplish the size and the three-point shooting. But assuming he's not here, and he's not right now, and There's no connection as to where he's going to go or where he's visiting or anything like that right now. Hope Syracuse can take a look at him. You got to assume with a taller lineup that you just can't use it if you need three-point shooting and you're trailing. It's as simple as that. Now, there's also another thought. I had a question in the comment section asking, can I see Naheem McLeod and Eddie Lampkin on the floor at the same time? And I can at times. It would certainly be interesting. I guess Donnie Freeman would be the 3, and then you can put who you want as the 1 and 2. I could see it. I don't know how often it would be used. It would be kind of fun. But overall, I think that is not the greatest strategy in the world just because you're sacrificing a lot of the up and down nature. You can't really get out in transition if you have Naheem McLeod and Eddie Lampkin on the floor at the same time. You're limited in that regard. So maybe in spurts, Eddie Lampkin and Naheem McLeod on the floor at the same time, but probably not often. Once again, the lineup that we discussed today: J.J. Starling at the 1, Chris Bell at the 2, Jyare Davis 3, Donnie Freeman 4, and Eddie Lampkin 5. A taller possible lineup combination for Syracuse basketball next season. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I drop the next podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And everyone, have a great day.